You've probably heard that famous line, make your money work for you. It sounds poetic, almost effortless. Like money is an employee that shows up early, stays late, and never takes a vacation. But what if that's a myth? What if money isn't a tireless worker? It's more like a spoiled intern. It doesn't lift a finger unless you pay it a hefty salary up front. That's the uncomfortable truth about compounding. Everyone tells you it's magic. That time and patience are all you need. Yet when you look closely, time alone is a weak ally. Without enough weight, without scale, compounding crawls. Take Andy, a disciplined saver. He gave up coffee runs, skipped concerts, and invested $200 a month for 12 years. He expected fireworks. Instead, he got a flickering candle, 30-something thousand dollars. He didn't fail. He followed every rule. He just started too small. The world tells you patience is the secret, but patience without power just leads to polite disappointment. Compounding isn't a fairy tale. It's a machine that needs heavy input to spin fast enough to matter. And that weight, that fuel, comes from scale. Let's be honest, the rich aren't richer because they started early. They're richer because they started big. They didn't sprinkle pennies into the market. They poured in buckets. That's why Warren Buffett didn't truly become Warren Buffett until he had millions to compound. Time didn't make him rich. Capital did. The problem is, most people are told to play a long game with tiny stakes. Just keep at it, they say. As if discipline alone can bend the math. But the math doesn't care. 10% of a small number is still small. That's the illusion of early investing without scale. It feels noble, even moral. But financially, it's like pushing a shopping cart uphill with one apple inside. It'll move, sure, just not far enough to change your life. So if you want compounding to work for you, you need to give it something heavy to lift. That's the game the wealthy play. Not patience, but density. They pour large sums early. They don't wait for 30 years of slow magic. They condense time. What takes the average investor decades, they compress into a handful of bold years. It's not luck, it's structure. It's capital weight. Let's pause on that idea, capital density. Imagine two trampolines. Drop a raindrop on one, nothing happens. Drop a bowling ball on the other, the surface bends, stretches, and launches it back. That's what a large sum does for compounding. It bends the timeline in your favor. This is why starting small isn't bad, it's just incomplete. You start small to learn, but you scale up to win. Here's the trap. Most financial advice celebrates consistency, but ignores scale. It's easier to tell people to stay disciplined than to tell them find a way to make bigger moves. But discipline without growth is just endurance. And endurance alone doesn't create wealth, momentum does. So how do you build that momentum if you weren't born into money? The answer isn't saving harder, it's building skill faster. Every wealthy person you admire began by compounding something other than money. They compounded competence. They built skills that multiplied income. Sales, design, coding, negotiation. Each one added zeros to their earning potential long before any investment did. $1,000 in an index fund might grow 8% a year. $1,000 spent on sharpening a high-value skill could double your income forever. Which one compounds faster? That's the hidden path. The real compounding engine sits between your ears. The financial world rarely mentions it because it doesn't collect management fees when you learn to write, sell, or build. But skill-based compounding is the one form of growth no market crash can erase. Let's revisit Andy. He did everything right, but what if, instead of skipping coffee, he spent that same discipline learning a skill that added $10,000 to his annual income, then invested that surplus? Suddenly, compounding has something to work with. He's not climbing with bare hands anymore. He's got gear. That's how the wealthy accelerate. They don't wait for their money to grow, they grow their money supply. They feed the compounding machine until it hums. It's like feeding logs into a fire. A tiny flame stays fragile. Feed it larger pieces, and it becomes self-sustaining. This shift in thinking from time to scale, from saving to creation, is where wealth truly begins. But let's not romanticize risk, because once you build scale, your next enemy isn't slowness, it's loss. The wealthy don't protect their time, they protect their base. Warren Buffett's 2 rules, never lose money and never forget rule number 1, sound like cliches until you understand compounding's math. A 50% loss means you need 100% gain just to break even. That's not recovery, that's survival. That's why the rich appear cautious. They aren't scared, they're strategic. They treat every dollar as an employee who must survive to recruit more. They diversify not because it's trendy, but because volatility kills momentum. They'd rather earn 7% forever than gamble for 25% once. Because when you lose big, you reset the clock. That's the real definition of financial maturity, understanding that growth matters less than endurance. It's not about how high your returns climb, it's about how long they stay alive. And the funny part, once you protect your capital, it becomes fearless for you. It starts multiplying without permission. That's when compounding finally feels real. Now let's step beyond money altogether. Because the truest compounding doesn't happen in charts or spreadsheets. It happens in your habits, your mindset, your relationships. Money is just a reflection, a byproduct. The real wealth grows invisibly before it ever shows up numerically. Read one meaningful book, apply what you learn, and your decisions improve forever. That's compounding. Build a network of thoughtful, reliable people, and your opportunities multiply. That's compounding. Replace one bad daily habit with one constructive one, not just for a week, but for a year, and you've shifted your entire trajectory. That's compounding too. So when you think about wealth, stop narrowing the lens to finance alone. Compounding is a principle of life. Energy feeds on energy. Knowledge feeds on curiosity. Discipline feeds on progress. Money is just the echo. Here's the truth no financial book dares to print. Compounding isn't kind to the small or the slow. It rewards weight. It rewards consistency after scale. That means your real mission isn't just to start early. It's to start dense. Build capital, yes, but also build capability. Build systems that generate surplus. Because once you create weight, the magic begins. The game was never about patience alone. It was about position. And position is earned. So if you feel behind, you're not doomed. You're just pre-scale. Your job now is to build the mass that makes compounding bend toward you. You do that through skill, through smart risk, through protecting your base and feeding your engine. When you do, money finally starts to work for you. Not because it wants to, but because it has no choice. That's the real secret of wealth. Not faith in time, but force through scale. Not waiting for magic, but designing momentum. You don't need to be born rich. You need to reach critical mass and let physics take over. That's when compounding stops being theory. It becomes freedom. Let's imagine two people standing at the same starting line. One has a heavy backpack filled with capital, skills, and systems. The other has just hope and discipline. They both start walking. At first, the pace looks the same, but as the terrain tilts uphill, one keeps climbing while the other runs out of breath. That's the silent advantage of scale. It's not about intelligence, it's about carrying enough momentum to keep moving when progress slows. People often mistake motion for advancement. They check their portfolios, see a few $100s of growth, and feel reassured. But progress without acceleration is just a treadmill. You're sweating, but you're still in the same room. To move forward, you need velocity, and velocity comes from weight. Think about a rocket. It burns most of its fuel in the first few minutes just to escape gravity. Once it's in orbit, it can coast for years. Wealth works the same way. Those early years aren't about comfort. They're about escape velocity. You pour effort, energy, and income into building mass until gravity stops pulling you down. The people who seem lucky later in life are usually the ones who did that heavy lifting early. They gave compounding enough weight to orbit on its own. But what about everyone still stuck on the launch pad? The answer isn't guilt, it's adjustment. If compounding rewards scale, then the real question becomes, how can you create scale when you don't start with it? You do it by stacking advantages, small wins that multiply instead of fade, a new skill that earns more each month, a better system for saving, automating, or reinvesting, a side project that generates steady income. Each layer adds density. Each layer brings you closer to orbit. Most people underestimate how fast scale can build once momentum begins. They assume it's linear, like climbing stairs. But real compounding behaves more like dominoes. One push timed correctly triggers a cascade. That's why the first few years feel slow. It's not failure, it's priming. Every bit of progress stacks quietly until suddenly it's loud. And that's when people say, you got lucky. But luck rarely shows up for those who stop trying to increase their mass. It shows up for those who kept feeding the system, even when the results looked invisible. There's another reason scale matters: protection. When you have mass, you can absorb shocks. A $10,000 loss feels catastrophic but when you've built $500,000, it's a bruise, not a wound. That's the power of bulk. It gives you resilience, and resilience is underrated. Everyone talks about growth. Few talk about endurance. Yet endurance is what separates those who stay wealthy from those who only visit wealth temporarily. Compounding needs safety as much as growth. Without safety, every gain risks being erased. That's why the rich care more about protecting their base than chasing the next big win. They've learned the quiet math of survival. Slow progress is still progress. A 7% steady climb beats a 25% surge, followed by a 15% fall. It's not fear, it's respect for the rules of math. Every loss compounds backward. Every preserved dollar compounds forward. If you've ever wondered why some people seem calm when markets drop, it's because they built padding. Their system can take a hit. Their wealth isn't fragile. So if you're building your path now, don't just focus on income. Focus on insulation. Build systems that can take a punch. Emergency funds, skill diversity, flexible habits, these are the shock absorbers of compounding. They keep your engine running while others stall. That's the unseen wealth, not the number in your account, but the structure protecting it. Here's something few people realize until it's almost too late. The earlier you understand compounding isn't about patience but positioning, the earlier you stop wasting time. Because compounding doesn't care about your effort, it cares about your input. Effort without capital is friction. Effort with capital is acceleration. This isn't a message of despair, it's a message of urgency. You can't save your way to wealth if your starting base is too small, but you can create your way there. Through business, through skill, through systems that multiply your earnings. The average person waits for permission. The wealthy create conditions. They stop asking, how long will this take? And start asking, how big can I make this now? That question flips the game. Because once you give compounding something real to work with, it becomes almost unfairly powerful. Imagine your capital as a snowball. At first, it barely grows. You push and push, but it still looks small. Then, one day it becomes heavy enough that gravity joins your side. From that point forward, the mountain does half the work. That's the moment everyone's waiting for, the invisible tipping point where effort turns into momentum. But that moment only comes if you've spent years packing the snow tight. No shortcuts, no magic, just density. The financial world loves to sell optimism. Anyone can be rich, they say, if you just start early. But the truth is more uncomfortable and more empowering. Anyone can build wealth, not through waiting, but through designing. It's not about how old you are. It's about how much weight you've built to compound on. You can start at 30, 40, even 50 and still outrun someone who started at 18. If your capital base is heavier, scale outruns time, every single time. That's why the phrase slow and steady wins the race isn't always true. In compounding, it's not the tortoise or the hare that wins. It's the one carrying the biggest snowball. If you remember nothing else from this video, remember this. Compounding doesn't reward patience. It rewards mass. And you can build mass not by saving cents, but by creating dollars. That's the true meaning of making your money work for you, because money doesn't work until it's given a real job. A job fueled by scale, protected by systems, and guided by skill. Once you reach that point, everything changes. Time stops being an enemy and becomes your quiet ally. It multiplies your decisions while you sleep, and that right there is freedom. The freedom not to chase income. The freedom not to fear expenses. The freedom to choose. That's what the passive path is really about. Not passivity, but power. Not waiting for someday, but building today so that someday takes care of itself. That's how compounding stops being theory and becomes reality. Not through patience, through power, through weight, through scale. Before we wrap up, remember this. Wealth isn't a finish line. It's a rhythm. You don't need perfect timing, just consistent movement in the right direction. Every skill you grow, every smart dollar you save, every risk you take with intention, it all adds up. That's your compounding in motion. If this video gave you a new way to look at money, give it a like. It tells the algorithm and me that you found it valuable. Subscribe to The Passive Path if you haven't already. Because every week, we break down the kind of truths that schools and banks don't teach in a way that actually makes sense. Leave a comment below and tell me what part of this hit home for you. Was it the idea of scale, or realizing that skill is the real compounding engine? I read every single one, and if someone you care about is still stuck believing patience alone will make them rich, share this video with them. It might be the wake-up call they've been waiting for. Until next time, keep building your capital, your skills, and your systems. You're closer to freedom than you think. Good luck, and I'll see you in the next video.